I see you have returned for episode 2. Let's pick up right where we left off. And so, the Candyland gods created Bootsy. Bootsy was a cat from the For Real Friends line of toys. Now we are crossing dimensions here, between the real world and Candyland. And we all obviously know that Candyland is just a made-up place, that I'm just a puppet, essentially, that Kenny is controlling right now and making this video. But we don't talk about that. We're doing this for fun, because we are telling the history of this land. Anyways, Bootsy existed. She was really nice, and Kenny got along well with her, and he was very happy to be taking care of his first resident of Candyland. Kenny wasn't sure what he wanted to do with Candyland yet. In fact, he didn't even know what he wanted to name Candyland. You see, because Candyland never really got a name. At least, not yet. Kenny was very satisfied. And so, Ashume continued creating other, characters. Similar to Bootsy, but with lots of differences. They were much smaller, they couldn't speak in some cases, and were just way different. Even talking cookies existed. It was pretty wild. Kenny found it really fun, but knew he enjoyed Bootsy's presence the most. Because he knew that Bootsy was someone like him, who wanted to help the world. Bootsy later became a doctor, just like Kenny. Since Kenny was like this magical person, he had many jobs. Doctor, running Candyland, police officer, and much more. How Kenny still takes on all these roles today, I'm not sure. But I praise the guy for doing it. But we'll get to that later. So, the Candyland god took note of what Kenny liked and what Kenny didn't like. See, Kenny treated everyone fairly and the same, but Ashume knew what he needed to make next. And so, Ashume made Hatchimal. Hatchimal was obviously a Hatchimal. Hatchimal was a Panguala type. And so, Candyland God introduced Hatchimal to Kenny, Bootsy, and all the other residents. Kenny was very proud, because he knew that Hatchimal was similar to Bootsy in the sense that he could talk, but he was a bit more childish and young. Kenny actually ran school with Bootsy as teachers to teach Hatchimal and some of the other younger residents. At this point in the timeline, Hatchimal was technically just a late kid. However, that would obviously change later on. Ashume made something special though. When making Hatchimal, he knew that he couldn't, keep creating new life. He needed to make sure that he would still make the decisions of what Hatchimals or other characters could come into the world and what their personalities would be like. But he wanted to make it easier to where he didn't have to create the new life. And so, just for your note, we're getting a tiny bit sexual here. And so, he gave them special body parts that allowed them to reproduce and make other new life. And that's as deep as we're getting into that. Okay, back to the video. I'm just going to keep breaking the fourth wall because I'm Kenny and I can do that. And so, later on though, Kenny kept playing with the others. It was a lot of play back then, since it was a small town and there wasn't much to do. Kenny really had a blast with Hatchimal and Bootsy, watching them grow up and learning new things about his new friends. Later on, Ashume created the Hatchimals twins, Pinky and Violet. Pinky and Violet were the second and third Hatchimals and were twins. They acted similarly, they did the same things, most importantly, they were always together, and still are. Kenny welcomed the new twins in with open arms. He was so excited to have more Hatchimals enter the world. In fact, Kenny told Ashume one day that he wanted nothing else but more Hatchimals. More and more. So many more Hatchimals, he said. The very next day, I was created. Yours truly. But Ashume gave me something very special. that would continue to be passed down to certain other Hatchimals. I had magical abilities. I could revive people. I could help out by making simple tasks easier. I could teleport people around. But most importantly, I was a humongous help, and still am to this day. Obviously, I was the fourth Hatchimal, making me one of the oldest. Kenny was very intrigued about my magical abilities. And so, then, there was a little break. But little did Kenny know what his little land would soon be turning into.